Hello everybody, and welcome to Appalachian Cemetery Hunting with Robin. Today, we're going to be looking at the Sharp Cemetery number 2 in Claiborne County, Tennessee. Now, if you remember, we did an on-site video at another Sharp cemetery about a year ago, and as far as we know, these two cemeteries are not associated with each other. And during this video, I will be using some pictures I found on findagrave.com that were taken by Joe Clark, and he was known as the Hillbilly Snap Shooter, or HBSS as he always signed after his name. And I will credit his pictures accordingly, and he is buried in this cemetery. There are 68 people buried here, so let's get started. First, we have Celia Sharp Addington, 1875 to 1956. And here's a picture of her as a young woman. And here's another picture of her. Now this photo is a picture of her and her husband, Harold Henry Addington. And here is Harold Henry Addington's headstone. Excuse me, got tongue-tied. 1872 to 1941. Now here's a picture of him with his second wife, Maggie Sharp. And here's another photo of him and his third wife, Celia Sharp, that we talked about just a minute ago. And she was Maggie's sister, actually. And here's a picture of Harold with his 4 brothers, and he's the one in the middle. Next, we have William Brown, 1849 to 1924. Next is Ralph Edward Carroll, 1936 to 2013. Now we have Bessie Clark. She was born and died on February 22nd, 1970. Next is Della Carr Clark, 1878 to 1903. Next we have Douglas Sewell Clark, 1942 to 2021. Here's a picture. He's holding a calf in the 1940s. And here's a picture of him with his dad, Wade Hampton Clark Jr., who went by Junebug. And now the last 2 pictures we just looked at was taken by Joe Clark, and they're part of the Clark family photo collection. Next we have Wade Hampton Clark, 1877 to 1966, and his wife, Iris Russell Clark, 1888 to 1982. And here's a picture of him. And here's her picture. She's showing her handmade quilts. Now, if you look in the background on the wall, you'll see a picture of Woodrow Wilson. And these last 2 photos were taken by the Hillbilly Snap Shooter, Joe Clark. Next, we have Joe L. Clark. He was born in January of 1903 and died in December of 1903. He was just 10 months old. Next, we have Joseph Clark, 1836 to 1901. Now we have Robert L. Clark, 1906 to 1970. Next, we have Sarah Angeline Sharp Clark, 1839 to 1899. Next, we have Wade Hampton Clark Jr., and he went by Junebug, 1913 to 1999, and his wife, Virginia Gladys Sewell Clark, 1915 to 1979. Now here's a picture of him talking on the telephone in 1944, and this was taken by Joe Clark, and it is a part of the Clark family photo collection. Next, we have Joe Clark, 1904 to 1989. We found some interesting information about him. Here's his picture. Now, in 1932, Joe became restless and he moved to Detroit, Michigan, where he took a job as a watchman at a department store. Years later, he became homesick and took a vacation to come back home. He borrowed a camera and 3 rolls of film from a co-worker. Upon his return, his photos of a mountain funeral, as he called them, got attention from the local Detroit newspapers and even Life magazine, which gave him inspiration to become a photographer. He began his career as a photographer in the later years of the Great Depression, when the way of life of East Tennessee was steadily changing. Joe hoped to capture and preserve the history of the region that he called home before it was gone. In 1954, Joe became a photographer for Jack Daniels, photographing the well-known black and white advertisements, as well as the postcards from Lynchburg, which would help Jack Daniels become iconic and the best-selling whiskey brand in the world. He traveled across the United States during his extensive career as a photographer. Many of his photographs were published by Life, National Geographic, Look, and Newsweek magazines, and even by the U.S. Department of Agriculture. And Joe also had a handful of books published, achieving his old dream of becoming an author. And much of the Clark family's photographic work is archived at the University of North Texas's library. Upon Joe's death, he wished to be buried back home in the hills of East Tennessee. And again, as I mentioned earlier, he always proudly signed his name ending with HBSS, which is an acronym for the Hillbilly Snapshooter. Next, we have Troy Edwards, 1905 to 1994, and his wife, Mabel Clark Edwards, 1911 to 2005. Now we have Eugene Evans, 1930 to 2016. And he fought in the Korean War with the United States Army. Next, we have Betsy Cleo Sharp Gibson, 1905 to 1902 to 1937. Next, we have Cecil Harold Gibson, 1919 to 1989. And he served in the United States Army during World War II. Now we have Lena Longmire May. Let me back up. I messed that one up. We have Lena Longmire, and she was born in May of 1891 and died in June of 1891. And she was only a month old when she passed away. Next, we have Arnold Doc Sharp, 1899 to 1971, and his wife, Etta M. Osmus Sharp, 1896 to 1988. Next, we have Arnold Elwood Sharp, 1925 to 1987. Next is Cecil W. Sharp, 1915 to 1916, and he was just 1 year old when he passed away. Now we have Charlie M. Sharp, born and died in 1944, and his brother, Newton Odie Sharp, 1930 to 1945. Next is Charlie P. Sharp, 1906 to 1907. Next we have Christian Sharp. He was born in 1792 and died in 1874. And his wife, Cynthia Jane Owens Sharp, and she went by Polly, 1804 to 1872. This is a picture of the original headstone. It was taken by Joe Clark, the Hillbilly Snapshooter, in 1939. Next, we have Claude Park Sharp, 1919 to 1973, and his wife Muriel Lena Odell Sharp, 1926 to 1995. Next, we have Clay Edward Sharp, 1927 to 2012. Now, you'll notice this is a double headstone, and it's got his wife's name on there, but there's no death date, so I'm guessing she is still living. Next, we have Clay Edward Sharp Jr., 1949 to 2008, and he was a veteran of the United States Army. Next, we have Danny Lee Sharp, 1955 to 2009, and here's a picture of him. Next, we have Ether B. Sharp, and the middle name was actually B-double-E, 1887 to 1963, and his wife, Margaret Ann Moyer Sharp, 1895 to 1975. Next, we have Eva D. Sharp, 1877 to 1891. Now we have Gary Lynn Sharp, 1948 to 2016. And he served in the United States Army during the Vietnam War. Next, we have George Washington Sharp, 1827 to 1901. And his wife, Rebecca Elizabeth Bryant Sharp, and she went by Bexy, 1830 to 1895. Now we have Harold Burt Sharp, 1898 to 1966, and his wife Ruth Myrtle Painter Sharp, 1904 to 1992. Next, we have Harold Burt Sharp Jr., 1925 to 1982. And he served in the United States Air Force during World War II, the Korean War, and the Vietnam War. Next, we have John G. Sharp, 1875 to 1952, and his wife, Hattie Sharp, 1879 to 1952. And here's a picture of her. I don't know if you can see the dates or not, but she died first, and then he died 10 days later. Next, we have Herman L. Sharp, December of 1901 to February of 1902, and he was just a little over a month old when he passed away. Next, we have Isaac Henderson Sharp, 1843 to 1913, and his wife, Nancy Elizabeth White Sharp, she went by Nanny, 1845 to 1913, and they died just 8 days apart. Next, we have James L. Sharp, 1929 to 2005. As you can tell by the headstone, he was obviously a truck driver. And also notice the anchor near the top. An anchor on the headstone symbolizes hope. And I'm not sure what the UNC stands for. If any of you do, please let us know. We'd appreciate it. Next, we have James Rufus Sharp, 1904 to 1981. And his wife, Nellie J. Sharp, 1897 to 1969. Now we have Jefferson M. Sharp, 1878 to 1922. And his wife, Sarah Matilda Edwards Sharp, and she went by Maddie, 1885 to 1932. Next, we have the Reverend Lloyd Sharp, 1939 to 1985. And his wife, Magdalene Sharp, I hope I pronounced that right, 1944 to 2012. Next is Lewis Coleman Sharp, 1921 to 1955. Next is Mary A. Sharp, 1859 to 1913. Next is Nancy Cleo Sharp, 1936 to 1938. She was just 2 years old when she passed away. And next, we have Peggy Cooley Sharp, 1931 to 2000. And last and certainly not least, we have Ray Franklin Sharp, 1932 to 2003. And notice the school bus on his headstone. Well, folks, that does it for Sharp's Chapel Cemetery number 2. Not Sharp's Chapel, Sharp Cemetery number 2. Sorry. We would like to thank you for watching, and we hope you liked this video. Please hit the like, share, and subscribe buttons. Until next time, take care.